I was working very successfully as a creative director in an advertising agency in the late 90s. I was working on big global projects. I was traveling the world. Yeah, I was very unhappy. And I asked myself the question, is traditional communications working as it once was? And this was in the late 90s. And really, even in the early 2000s, you could see the evidence sort of stacked against us that it wasn't as efficient and as successful as it once was. So I just asked myself a very simple question. If the 20th century was about interruptive communications, which was incredibly successful, what would the 21st century be about? What's the antithesis of that? And I felt that word was engagement. And then I went on a journey of trying to understand what that meant to me. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are actually much, much broader even than just kind of talking about the context of the internet and social networks. And it's a continual journey that I'm involved with. But really, I would say that this story is about people. It is about communication. It is about technology. It is about media. And it is about society. And for me, it's about understanding the very intimate and complex relationship between these things that enables us to perhaps start to understand what is happening in the world that we're talking about today. People talk about the fact we're in a communications revolution, and I happen to agree with David in what he says. But we need to dig into that in a way so that it's comprehensible to all of us. In 1977, a social philosopher called Richard Sennett wrote a book called The Fall of Public Man. And in his book, basically what he said was that whereas before our societies were kept together in a kind of cohesiveness, where we all felt that we were participants and that we were belonging, what the mass industrial or mass consumer society had done and the form of mobility have forced us actually to turn away from the public sphere, to disengage with that, and to internalise ourselves. And perhaps in many ways the 1980s was one of the greatest moments of that we had ever seen. And it was David Cameron that famously said, when we were talking about the appalling behaviour of young people, or supposed so, was that we should all hug a hoodie. Now, the point is, this picture carries for me so much meaning is that this young man actually, there was no context in his relationship to David Cameron. So therefore, there was no meaning with his relationship to politics. From an organisational and a brand perspective, is if there is no context and there is no meaning, then you become irrelevant. And the next thing you become after irrelevant is you become obsolescent. And I think that there are many, many organisations out at the moment are struggling now between irrelevancy and obsolescence. However, 30 years later, Sennett wrote another book called The Craftsman. And in that, he talks about craftsmanship in a way that actually we as skilled people, through our craft skills, whatever they may be, actually benefit society. And we have a sense of belonging and meaning in our lives, but our consequence of our ability to participate meaningfully in society. So he says that, in fact, every man and woman has the ability, an innate need to have some form of craftsmanship skills, something that they give back. And a few years ago, Demos did a report, which Charlie Ledbetter co-wrote, about the pro-am, the professional amateur, people that are creating things, even though they're their hobbies, to professional standards. And again, there are many times that I get people saying, well, you know, I'm sorry, but I can't understand that, you know, the amateur is actually better than the professional, that actually all this stuff in social media, all the blogs, all the stuff on YouTube is all rubbish. And I say, well, the majority of broadcast we watch is rubbish. And the majority that is written in newspapers is rubbish. And the majority of the hundreds of thousands of books that are published even in this country every year are rubbish. But it points to the fact that we want to take back and participate in our world in a very different way. If I say the word folk culture to you in this room, I would imagine the stereotype is of a man of a certain age sitting in the back of a pub with a beard, a big baggy jumper, playing a banjo or an old beaten-up guitar, singing about songs that actually mean nothing to me. But culture made by the folk. It's the way that we tell our stories and we put ourselves in the context of time and space and history. If you go to YouTube and you put in Iraqi military, you will find tens of thousands of videos, people making them to very, very professional standards sometimes, explaining their experiences and telling their stories about what it's like to fight on the front line. Some of them will reduce you to tears when you understand the full tragedy that war brings upon us. But we all want to be able to tell our stories. By 2012, Nokia reports that 25% of all media will be made by us. What does that mean? How does that challenge us as organisations and as communicators? And Henry Jenkins, who is an MIT professor, and I thank you, David, for being so kind to me. Henry is also someone that I would look up to and say he's been very influential in the way that I understand media, but he talks about the fact that young people have a very different relationship with media, that they do want to create, they do want to share, they do want to discuss. So he says that consumption is now actually participatory. It's a participatory media that we live in. The image on the right is from World in South Korea. It's a virtual world, a bit like Habbo Hotel, but you can also manage it from your mobile phone. 95% of the entire Korean population, teenage population in South Korea, belong to World. Who's it owned by? A mobile phone company. How do you generate data usage? You create things that are so engaging that people want to be part of. And you see a currency and a value in those things. So one of the things that I do say is that people embrace what they create. And I'm going to sort of share with you some of my thoughts in terms of how that works. So in terms of what we could do, should do, might do for you, I think should look like this. Well, we enable our clients to look upon the world, I say, with fresh eyes, which enables them to make the right strategic decisions. One of the things that profoundly frustrates me is I think that people are making decisions sometimes where they're not fully informed by the true landscape in which they're upon. So they're making investments and choices which cost money and people's time and energy, but it's not based on true insight. We can create new business concepts. We can enable companies large and small to rethink their business strategies. We advise on mobile and digital strategies. And we can create new products and services. And we've developed cross-platform marketing communication initiatives. Now, one of the things that I think is really important then is educating. You can't do, and this is where so my background is that I'm a creative person, okay? My entire life has been about working as a creative entity, working with people. And the thing that I asked the question in the first place is, if I'm going to work this hard for my clients, if I'm going to be this passionate about how we're going to create great, compelling communication, I've got to be sure that I'm doing the things in the right way for the right reasons. You want me to dig a hole? I'll dig a hole for you, but I want to make sure it's the right hole in the right space, done for the right reasons. So I think that we kind of all need to go back to school to educate ourselves, to allow us actually to fill out the knowledge gaps, because I also see massive knowledge gaps when I talk to individuals and companies. And that's not wrong. You're not wrong for that, because the changes that we're witnessing are massive. But just let me give you a little example. I've got a friend of mine, and he's a businessman in California. He's older than me. He's got young kids, however, and he decided that he was going to travel through Europe, take the kids with him on a train. Okay, but his kids said, "Dad, you really should be taking the Harry Potter books with you and listening to them, because they're really great books." And their dad thought, well, what I'll do is I'm going to buy myself an iPod, I'm going to upload them as audio files, and I'm going to listen to them as I travel through Europe. So as the 1620 from Turin to Rome leaves the station, he turns on his iPod and he starts to listen to Harry Potter. At the end of the week, he sits down for breakfast with his kids, and he says to his kids, "Do you know what, kids? I'm sorry, but I've really tried with Harry Potter. I really have. But it's not working. The plot's all over the place. The narrative comes and goes. It doesn't make sense to me." So his kids take his iPod and they look at it and they start to laugh. And he looks at them and he doesn't understand why they're laughing. And then they look at each other and they laugh some more. And he says, "Well, what's the problem?" They said, "Well, Dad, you've been listening to Harry Potter all week on shuffle."